I don't have any cash on me. He wouldn't let me walk away. He grabbed my wrist again.
Okay, so the biggest mistake as a first-time visitor to New York that we made.
Hope everyone's staying safe. I'm John, and if you don't know me, I normally create videos about New York City or travel. We're trying something a little bit different today. I asked my subscribers and members of my Patreon to submit a short video to me about the biggest mistakes they made on their first trip to New York City. And I was blown away by these answers. Whether you're a first-time visitor to the Big Apple or a veteran traveler, you are gonna learn a lot. Trust me. Let's get to those submissions.
Hey, my name is Teresa and I'm from Reedsville, Georgia. My biggest mistake on my first trip to New York was overpacking. It goes without saying, you don't need to bring 4 pairs of shoes, and you don't need to bring 2 or 3 outfits for each day, and yes, you can wear the same outfit more than once. I promise you, nobody will notice, nobody will care.
Thank you, Teresa, one of our Patreon members. The only time I would ever suggest somebody brings a big suitcase to New York is if you're gonna pack it with a lot of souvenirs and clothes for the way back, and then you would probably want to take a taxi or an Uber to the airport anyway.
It's equally important to not be afraid to venture off the beaten path. So I remember the first time I went to New York and I was wandering the streets of Manhattan Chinatown, and somehow stumbled upon this beautiful, tranquil Taoist temple right amongst the hustle and bustle of downtown Manhattan. Who knew? And it's on Bowery Street, by the way, if you're interested. But, you know, it's moments like those that are hard to come by. Those opportunities are hard to come by, especially in such a concrete jungle like that. So it's important to really be in the moment and be present wherever you are in New York or in your life. Because especially given the new reality that we're living in with quarantine, we can't take those opportunities for granted.
I like this tip. Be open to all possibilities, not just in New York City, but anywhere you travel in the world. Very Zen advice.
Hey John, this is Lainey from San Antonio, Texas, and I can say that I did not make a ton of mistakes on my first trip to New York this past January, thanks to all of your awesome videos. But one mistake I made was that my trip was centered around a conference that was in Midtown Manhattan, and I booked an Airbnb in Jersey City. Now, if you don't know, Jersey City is not as close to Midtown Manhattan as it seems. It was about an hour to an hour and a half commute every day back and forth, and that made it really hard to plan out anything other than the conference because I was there by myself and I wanted to make sure I was getting back on time before it got too dark.
I've heard stories of people booking Airbnbs in Brooklyn thinking they'd be close to Manhattan when it's like a 45-minute subway ride, or certain parts of Jersey City not near the PATH train where you would have to take a bus or a really long walk even to get to the station. Great advice. Always look at the address of your lodging before you book.
This is Edward from the Netherlands. The biggest mistake my girlfriend and I made when visiting New York for the first time was going in March. It was absolutely freezing, city was covered in snow, and we kinda underestimated how extreme the weather can be. My top tip for you guys would be to either go in May or in September. Chances are that the temperatures are gonna be good. City is nice and green, so you can enjoy your picnic in one of the many parks. Plus, as a nice bonus, is that the city is not swamped with tourists yet.
The biggest mistake I made was my first visit in 2002. I booked the cheapest hotel room in a decent hotel that I could find on a cheap travel website. And what I got was a W Hotel on Lexington, which is an older property with a lot of different size rooms. And today it's a Maxwell. It's a different place. I don't know how it is today. But the room I got was maybe 75 to 100 square feet, barely 6 inches bigger than the perimeter of a queen-size bed. It was very tiny, and luckily I was a solo traveler, so I was somehow able to make it work. And these days I pay close attention to square footage of hotel rooms, especially in older properties, or I go ahead and I book a more modern chain hotel that all have cookie cutter size rooms that are pretty much decent size. And you know, I learned that you pay for what you get in New York, especially in square footage. And you know, when you book the cheapest room at the cheapest website, you usually wind up with the room that would be impossible for the hotel to book at full price otherwise. So
Thank you to Dave, one of our patrons, for submitting. Yes, Manhattan is absolutely notorious for small hotel rooms, and one way I would combat this is to look up reviews on TripAdvisor to see if a lot of people have complained about small rooms, and try to call the hotel in advance to request a decent sized room.
Hey, my name is Hannah, and I would say that this mistake wasn't really one that I made on my part because my first visit was with a high school choir. But if I could change one thing about that trip, it would be not staying in the middle of Midtown Manhattan. We were right in the heart. So I feel like for most people when they travel, they're kind of looking, whenever they get off that long plane ride or the bus ride, that they're looking to kind of go back to their lodgings and decompress. For me, just being in such a crazy area, I found that to be a little bit difficult, just because I was trying to process like all of the things that were going on around me. I often compare it to my second visit where I had the opportunity to stay in the Upper West Side. You know, it's still New York, it's still gonna be busy, it's still gonna be loud, but it's definitely not as like initially overwhelming as the Times Square area would be.
In a lot of cities, the logic is, well, if I'm going to Amsterdam, I want to stay in central Amsterdam. But in New York City, you want to avoid staying in Times Square. Outside of the convenience for the location, I just don't think it's worth it because of the hectic vibe. Avoid it if you can, trust me.
My name is Sherida. I'm from Baltimore, Maryland. And to quote John, what's up, members of the barrio? I would say the biggest mistake I made the first time I went to New York is I took way too many pictures. Didn't realize I took like probably hundreds of pictures by the time I got home. And I guess I didn't really enjoy it the first time because I didn't really pay attention to a lot of stuff. I just took more pictures than anything. So I would say the first time you go to New York, if you want to take pictures, just take key pictures of things you're going to see. Enjoy the city. And New York has the best energy of any city I've ever visited in the United States. And I cannot wait to go back when everything opens back up. Also, I drove my friend crazy driving in New York, listening to Jay-Z's Empire State of Mind probably like 10 times. So, yeah. But I would say just enjoy the city, take as many, as few pictures as possible, and just enjoy the energy of the city. You're going to love it.
This is Victor. I am from the Philippines, currently living in the Bahamas. The biggest mistake that I made as a first-time visitor to New York City was not knowing the directions on how to get to my Airbnb from the airport. At the time, I had no internet, and I knew nothing about New York City, so I had to ask strangers for directions. Luckily, after an hour or so of walking, of taking subways, I was able to find it. And take note, it was freezing that time, so it was really hard for me to walk in the streets.
What's going on, John and members of the barrio? Okay, so the biggest mistake as a first-time visitor to New York that we made was visiting during SantaCon. For those who don't know, SantaCon happens every December in New York. It's when people from all over the world come to New York, bar hop dressed as Santa. If you're into that, go for it. But for us, what we experienced was 8 to 12 hours of endless tripping over Santas, getting in fights, urinating on the streets. Just not a good time if you only have maybe a day or so in New York. So plan around that event unless you're into something like that.
Nothing like some bad Santas to ruin your trip to the Big Apple. Look, I wouldn't say to avoid New York City during SantaCon because it is in December, a very popular time of year to visit. I would say be aware of it, know what areas of the city they're going to be in. It's going to be entirely bars, and go to places that you wouldn't interact with those Santas, like a museum or eat Tibetan food in Jackson Heights. If you see a drunk Santa in any of those spots, take a picture. I want to see it.
Hey John, my name is Brent. I currently live in New York City, but I was born and raised in Paterson, New Jersey. So the biggest mistake I made as a first-time visitor in New York City was getting lost on the subway. My first trip back in New York City was back in 2005. And as a young 17-year-old, I thought I knew what's up and down, what's left and right without even giving it a second thought. I took a train from the 59th Street, Columbus Circle station. I wanted to go up basically 2 stops on the C train. But I decided to look at the color of the train rather than the actual letters. So I ended up taking an A train all the way up to 125th Street, Harlem. And I didn't know where I was. I was honestly freaking out. This was the era before smartphones. And I ended up discovering how to get back. So a couple of tips would make mention. If you think you went too far ahead, I would say straight up, go back to where you came from. A lot of the New York City express and local trains run along the same line. So for example, the A train goes from 59th Street, 125th Street, but a lot of the local stops that I wanted to get on, you could get on a local C train on the other side of the tracks going downtown. Another thing that I would suggest, especially now, you have the ability to look up your route on Google Maps or City Mapper, which is the two apps I still use in order to get places. And those two particular apps have been super helpful for me even as a local, and I'm sure would be even more beneficial to you as a tourist.
Thanks to Brent, one of our patrons. Yes, taking the wrong subway, such a common mistake. Download City Mapper on your phone, and I don't think you're going to make this mistake very often.
Hello, my name is Martin, and I live in Philadelphia. I've been coming to New York to visit for the last 4 or 5 years consistently every few months to try something different. One of the biggest mistakes I made on the first time I came back to visit just to try something different was deciding to take an Uber from 27th and 7th, where the megabus dropped me off, to our hotel, which was in the financial district down on Water Street. And the mistake I made was at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I tried to take an Uber on a Friday to the hotel. It says 17 minutes on the app. Ended up being almost a 2-hour ride because it was so much construction and traffic, and it was just a mess. I learned from there on, if you're going to travel through New York, or particularly through Manhattan, do not take Uber, do not drive. Always take the subway. It's always best. Second mistake I made, same weekend now. I got a Metro card and I loaded $20 on it. I didn't realize how much I was going to use the subway. So, and that $20 went quick. About 7 rides, I had to reload again. So what I start doing is every time I come up there now, even if I'm going to be there for 2 days, let's just say I'm going to be there for a weekend from Friday to Sunday or Saturday to Monday, I always just buy an unlimited Metro card for the week. That way I don't get stuck with having to load a Metro card.
Hi, I'm Andrew.
And I'm Kyla, and we're from St. John, New Brunswick, Canada.
And the biggest mistake that we made on our first trip to New York as tourists on our honeymoon was trying to do too many things in that first trip. We were in New York City for a week, and in that week we did a hockey game, 2 Broadway shows, a symphony, we did a comedy show, we did a late night TV taping, and then we also did Top of the Rock, Empire State, 9/11 Museum and Memorial, Statue of Liberty Cruise, and Museum of Natural History.
That being said, we did get all of the touristy stuff done on our first vacation, so the next vacations we were able to spend more time on stuff. But it did make it so that we couldn't do stuff that we really enjoy, like going to Central Park. We actually only went to Central Park for about 15 minutes, and it's actually one of our favorite places to go.
We've been back to New York 7 times since our honeymoon, and the less stuff we plan, we find the better experience we have. We can just have a more organic trip through the city. If there's something we see or want to do, we have the time to do it. So our best advice would be to just not overbook your trip and just make sure you have time to do things that might just spontaneously come about, and you'll have a really good time.
Of course, the Canadian couple goes to a hockey game in New York City, but great advice. Don't try to plan every single step of your trip. Leave some things open to chance.
Hi John, this is Michael Alligator from the outskirts of Chicago. I'm 12 years old, and I also have a YouTube channel called Traveling the World. It's a newbie channel. The biggest mistake I made when coming to New York City was most of the museum prices are suggested. Like if you go to the counter, we thought we could book everything online easily. We could plan our trip beforehand, same price, no worries. But it's only because of your videos that I found out. Oh, and it was too late because I visited New York City in 2014 with my family, and they didn't and I started watching your channel like end of 2018, and that's how I found out that most of the museums have suggested pricing. Second mistake was Madame Tussauds is a total tourist trap. It sucks. It's pointless. And the reason we went there is because we thought the MoMA was the Guggenheim, and we're not that much into modern art. So yeah, good. Keep telling everyone. Stay safe. Hope you're doing well.
Michael is one wise 12-year-old, and thank you to his mom for giving us permission to use this video. Absolute great point here. You don't need to prepay for museum admissions. For example, the American Museum of Natural History, you can pre-buy the ticket online or go to the counter and pay what you wish to get in. Now, there are other museums where there are certain days of the week that are either free or pay as you wish. I did a video talking about some of these topics, putting a card to it right here. Great job, Michael.
What's up, members of the barrio? My name is Tristan and I'm from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And my first time New York mistake was not researching restaurants before my trip. So I ended up eating at a famous Famiglia, which I only found out was a national chain when I got home and saw one in the airport in my hometown. So for future trips, I made sure to do my research and ended up eating at better restaurants like Artichoke Pizza and Bleecker Street Pizza.
The only exception I'd make to this rule of not eating at chain restaurants would be a chain that is difficult to find in the United States, like the Jollibee that's located near Times Square. But yes, good advice. You don't come to New York City to eat at Sparrow's.
The one thing I wish we knew before we went to New York for the first time was that the map apps on your phone do not always give good directions in the middle of a bunch of high-rises. We spent so much time wandering back and forth, completely lost, because it kept redirecting us. To get around this, I discovered if I brought it up from our hotel, saved an image of the directions, then it worked better because we could just bring that up. It was a funny story though. One lady I passed on a corner, a little flower seller. After I passed her for the third time, she asked me if I needed help, and she got me to where I was trying to go.
Thanks to Susie, one of our patrons, yes, you can have GPS and mapping issues due to big buildings in Manhattan. Your advice of taking a picture of the turn-by-turn directions, I even use that in some cities that I'm not very familiar with, so very good tip right there.
Hi, my name is Ezgi. I'm from Turkey. The biggest mistake I made as a first-time visitor to New York City was avoiding New York City food like pizza, bagel, hot dog, cheesecake, just because they're high in calories. I consider that as a mistake, and if only I could go back right now, I would eat them all like there is no tomorrow.
The moral of the story here is start your diet after your New York trip.
Hey John and Adriana, my name is Krystal. I am from Minneapolis, Minnesota. The biggest mistake that I made when me and my husband visited New York for the first time back in 2017 was we didn't do really any research. I encountered the dudes with the CD in Times Square trying to hand them to me. It really caught me off guard. I also even got roped into one of the fake monks right outside Rockefeller Center. He actually grabbed my arm, pulled me aside, slapped one of the bracelets on my wrist, started doing what I thought was like a prayer, trying to wish me good luck. And then, of course, as I was like, thank you, I was about to walk away, he grabbed my arm again and said no. He opened up the notebook, and there he had the classic list of all of the donations, all these dollar amounts that people had given him that day. And I was like, I'm sorry, I don't have any cash on me. He wouldn't let me walk away. He grabbed my wrist again, was actually kind of agitated by this whole thing and ripped it off my wrist and just walked away from me. Do just a little bit of research. That way you can avoid those situations and you won't have a monk grabbing your arm like I did.
I had to save this one for last. Thank you to Krystal, one of our Patreon members. These hustles and tourist scams are so common in New York City. I made not one but 2 separate videos on these topics, putting a card above to them. Please check them out. Now it's your turn. Tell me in the comments what the biggest mistakes you made on your first trip to New York City were. I'm curious. Watch our other New York City playlists, all linked down below. Guys, thank you for submitting. Thank you for watching. Until next time.